Welcome back to SideQuest, episode 42, Final Fantasy VII, episode 26. And back with me is my esteemed colleague, Mr. Wesley Schantz. And Mr. Wesley Schantz, welcome back.
It's good to be back, yeah. There's a lot to discuss this time, but the big thing, I guess, is getting to disc 3. How did that happen, right?
I don't know. And it's incredible that we have had our own Aeris-like incident, losing one of our party members during the course of this. And I know something we want to talk about this time, because I was texting you furiously about it before, was what it means to allow Aeris to return to the live stream and what that means for moving on for somebody. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about beginnings and ends. Because, again, there was so much magic at the beginning of this game, getting back into this endeavor, listening to that music again for the first time. And now, even though we've been trudging along, and it's funny to what extent playing, sort of a magic, nostalgia-filled video game, which is made for, you have to have such an interesting social structure just to have a video game system, right? Like, you have to have working electronics, foreign trade, all sorts of and incredible archiving at this point, because I'm playing the game digitally on a PlayStation 3. I think you're actually playing the original. And that should be a question for me to you, but now we're on disc 3, and the only thing you have to do on disc 3 is go beat Sephiroth. We're at the end. And I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit about what do you think that means about human perception, about how difficult and interesting beginnings can be, but the sort of wave of emotions, or I should ask you, do you have a wave of emotions hitting you at this third, as this third disc hits? I had been so close to making the point last time that I felt that this game was not worthy of the epic moniker in comparison to epic literature. But I feel myself sort of not overwhelmed, but definitely hit in the chin by some nostalgia at the end of this game. And now even looking at some of the commentaries of people who've played this game many, many times, like 20 times through, and the interesting things that they get that I've missed from character commentary throughout the game. If you have certain characters at specific times, like Yuffie seems to be very interesting. Aeris and Tifa, when you're passing those baby birds that I think I chose to kill. They sort of love them, and they make interesting comments about them. But I want to ask you, what is it like getting to the end of this game for you? Do you agree that the middle felt distinctly different from the beginning and the end? And, are you starting to miss it?
From the beginning, I think that they do
precisely
well worth like that. Sorry, comparing the kinds of evil things that Cloud and Barrett have done to the kinds that Sephiroth is doing, they don't seem quite like the same thing anymore. Particularly given like the process that the team has gone through, fighting for the truth of their pasts and fighting for the survival of the planet versus the kind of path that Sephiroth's on, which is, self-aggrandizement at the cost of everything around him. I think that they sort of show you two approaches to maybe the problem of evil, and having Cloud and Barrett, be the ones that you are actually controlling and rooting for, reinforces the fact, I think, that their approach is much the preferable.
Well, and Wes, I have to apologize. I have no idea how much of this has actually been recorded, because I just noticed that my recording was not happening. So we may have just had a good chunk of a good conversation without it making it on here. That said, we will find out how much is actually being recorded. And the listeners out there who are getting this, hopefully that was a mistake that I made when I attempted to mute this at some point, and we didn't miss everything. But I just want to quickly recap some of the themes we've talked about, just in case we missed a lot of this. But we talked about going through Midgar again, returning back home, facing our own internal motivations, and noticing that potentially personal motivations like Marlene for Barrett, Sid and his new relationship with the woman that he once hated, I'm forgetting her name at this particular moment, but the one that he was constantly yelling at, who saved his life. Cloud himself recognizing his own flaws and that he doesn't simply want to save the world, but wanted to fight against Sephiroth from personal reasons. And Barrett also recognizing that even though he fought an avalanche and wanted to save the world, that he was like an avalanche and there was a lot of collateral damage, and that he was in some ways mean. We talked about Hojo's transformations and the transformations of ideals from positive to negative through Sephiroth himself being a hero who becomes a villain, Hojo himself being sort of a rigorous science or the face of science that thinks it's objective, that supports evil. And that sort of connects back to the point that we were just making. I was suggesting that the people that you mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was recorded or not, who are just lounging about in Corel and wherever, are the ones who allow evil to happen. And that is not itself a positive thing, that's like Dante's neutral angels who are not allowed in heaven or hell, that they are allowing the negative future to happen, whereas Cloud and his band of imperfect few are actually doing a very democratic thing by choosing to fight for good together, and also a very sort of Christian thing because they're fighting against time and their own mortality and their own imperfections in order to rid the world of evil, potentially evil that collectively forms itself into a figure like Lucifer or Voldemort or Sephiroth through the imperfect few people that exist failing to or refusing to recognize their own minor imperfections that in a collective mass form a figure of evil or sort of an anthropomorphized figure of evil, and that it is precisely when a few people come together to face themselves that they face the ultimate darkness. Because ultimately, if evil comes largely not through just projecting it onto somebody else and having a war, but from, the many little peccadillos of people in a host, like in a nation or a group, then the only way to defeat evil is by each person within such a group facing the evil within themselves, rather than, say, like in a witch hunt, which we see happening in our culture right now, accusing each other, right? Instead of just saying, you're the one with the evil, you're the witch, they have to recognize it in themselves. And so I'm not sure how much we missed, but I think what else should we add to the recap? And we haven't talked about the Proud Claude yet. What did you think about the end of Scarlet and Heidegger? Did you think that was appropriate? Did you think that was that preceded the Hojo battle? Did you have any difficulty with that? And yeah, Wes, just to try and recap, and hopefully we didn't miss all of the recording. But who knows? Who knows?
That's good. No, I think. Yeah, I think I'm back. I'm gonna try to just say a few things about Proud Claude. Yeah. So they're like the remaining Shinra people at this point, right? Because you've taken out all of the soldier contingents that have come against you. They're not really even able to offer much of a challenge anymore. President Rufus is gone, and these two, they like encase themselves in their ultimate weapon that they're so proud of, right? And it's really not much of a fight. Like it has, again, a lot of HP, but it's just a matter of time before you eventually, one way or another, take it down. And I think it's a lot easier if you have some of the kind of powerful spells that are optional to find, like Ultima or Knights of the Round. But I think you can also just kind of whittle it down too. Down there in the sort of the underground passageways, you also fight the Turks for the last time. Their fight is much more noble, I feel like, than Scarlet and Heidegger's Proud Claude fight, which is long and kind of like they're again not like facing you head to head. They're hiding behind this kind of mechanical creation, and it's it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, I agree. And just in case this wasn't recorded earlier, you had made the point that your perception of reality starts to form into what reality is based on the sort of patterns of behavior you start to implement in reality. And so the people around you actually form the world that you perceive. And a point I made based on that was that was precisely what Cloud had to face here and Barrett had to face, that they had made errors in the world and that was their contribution to the world, and therefore that was part of who they were. And that what Cloud had to do in order to accept sort of his relationship with Tifa and move forward into the world in order to potentially bring something new into the world that is appropriate, not in the same way that Cloud or that Sephiroth has attempted to do. He's trying to birth a new being, which is himself as a god into the world, whereas potentially Cloud, through his new consummation with Tifa, as is suggested through the night they share together, is trying to bring like a new life into the world. And we have suggested that potentially what Cloud has to accept is that he needs to put the memory of Aeris behind him, because Aeris is no longer a part of this world. She's now a part of the life stream or the stream of consciousness or the past. She's now a part of what the epic tradition would call the underworld. And, he can go into that underworld, into that past to derive strength from her, but she is no longer a part of the real world. And so insofar as what you perceive and the people around you are your world, when somebody disappears, they are gone from the world forever. And you can, in a very real way, though you can still access memories of them to give yourself strength and to derive information from them. But that that's interesting to what extent Scarlet and Heidegger bring boredom into the world here. That they again do something pointless. It's like they are pointless functionaries, as they always have been, with this giant super robot that sort of looks like a mech warrior or a Gundam. And they have so much pride, again, in their ingenuity. They're sort of Hojo-like in this way, being sort of scientists that just care about the product rather than what they are actually producing in the world, I would say, morally speaking. And I do agree that the Turks sort of standing up for their Turk pride, again, I sort of feel like we're James Potter and they're Severus Snape or Snivellus Snape, as they would say, like we're beating up on those Turks. And it's pretty easy to beat them, whereas it just takes more time to beat Scarlet and Heidegger. But I wonder if what you think is sort of their foul at the roots, that they're rotten at the roots, and that's what makes them easy to defeat, even though they have so much HP, that it was just a matter of time before they were defeated.
Yeah, and they're kind of comic relief throughout the story, along with much the same way as the Turks are, I guess. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't evil in just the same way. Even if they're sort of just following orders or just doing what they feel will promote their own interests, or whatever it might be. Again, I think the kind of evil that they represent, as opposed to the kinds of evil that Sephiroth represents, they're on a way different scale. And the way that you kind of confront and dispense with with this one is similarly a lot simpler.
Right. Okay. So for this time, we talked about the Proud Claw. We talked about Hojo and his negative transformations, and whether that is indicative, like in Milton, of Lucifer's transformation from beautiful to ugly and from strong to weak, whether that indicated that sort of falling prey to immoral thoughts and thus immoral actions make you literally uglier. And I do have one additional question on that, whether there is some suggestion from research on macaws that people like to look at that macaws like to look at high status macaws more than low status ones. And there is some suggestion through corollary research that humans prefer to look at high status humans. And I wonder to what extent Hojo's fall, so-called, is because you actually physically become less attractive to other people the more immoral you become. I wonder, as a hypothesis, whether you can actually become physically uglier without actually becoming physically uglier, because you lose sort of status on the dominance hierarchy through turning from the truth, or turning from the top, or God, that which draws you up, and turning towards, say, darkness. And I wonder to what extent the negative transformations of Genova into this terrifying monster, and Hojo into this into increasingly ugly creatures, or I guess he goes from regular to really ugly, to sort of ugly, but uglier in effect than in physique, his third form. And then, of course, Sephiroth sort of is bizarro Sephiroth, and then safer Sephiroth that looks sort of like Seraph Sephiroth as well. That whether you see anything in that idea.
The connection that came to mind as you were saying that is like the picture of Dorian Gray.
Yes, precisely.
Right? You've got this character who, physically remains beautiful, but only because he's got this painting of himself, which reflects his kind of moral decrepitude. So yeah, I mean, there's other kinds of fairy tales and stories which might go along with that, like the Beauty and the Beast kind of motif as well, where the two don't go quite hand in hand, but they're paired in a slightly different fashion, and do correspond, the appearance and the moral rectitude, that is, or the importance, or whatever it might be. I know that we started off by talking about how we were finally on disc 3 too, and maybe that's a place to just kind of wrap it up. Like, as much as I forgot what happened on disc 2, I really don't remember much happening on disc 3 except the final battle. Like, is there anything else that happens on disc 3?
No, see, I think the only difference is some side quests are now closed off to you, and so perhaps for next time I can catch up with you on a few. I'd like to do some Chocobo stuff, because like I was saying at the beginning, which I hope was recorded, I think we did get a good bit of this recording. I just accidentally pressed it incompetently at one point, so perhaps my moral rectitude has been hit during the course of this, or my competence meter has gone down a bit. But we were talking about the nostalgia of the beginning and the end, and you had some great comments about how the strength in this game seems to be in the beginning and the end, and any sort of communication, people tend to focus on the beginning and the end. And we talked about and neuroscience sort of experiments showing that people can just read the beginning and end of a word, and over the course of an entire paragraph, and get an entire meaning out of that. And talking about writing, making sure that there are parallels between the beginning and the end. And you said that your own personal experience of this game was that the beginning and the end were very strong. And I was talking about my nostalgia now that I'd gotten to the third disc, that now so much of this seems to be so close to the end that I want to go back through and see what I had been missing as I was sort of hurrying through the game. And again, that sort of relates back to a comment I had been making even way back when Vince was still playing with us, about how I could see elements of my personality just trying to get through things rather than savoring them. And perhaps those are elements of any sort of undeveloped personality. But yeah, I think what you can do is catch up on some side quests, and then there's that final boss battle. It's almost as if they wanted to hit that third disc number on this game, because it basically has like the entire world mapped out, and you can do chocobos, you can do that Forbidden Forest or Ancient Forest side quest that you just recently did. Some underwater stuff, fight Emerald Weapon. Ruby Weapon doesn't even seem to exist yet in my game. I don't remember when that even happens, but I just went by the Golden Saucer and didn't see Ruby Weapon hanging out there. So do I have to beat Ultimate Weapon first? But I think basically you can wrap up loose ends in the third disc and fight Sephiroth. And I'm still pretty weak, like only level 51 or 52 with my characters. And I think from Jagged, I need about 11 more levels to make it through to the end, as well as be able to fight off some instant death in that northern cave.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's work on leveling up and doing some side quests for next time. Sounds good.
Okay, and what is the Ancient Forest one, just out of curiosity, that you'd recently done? So you said you had done that side quest, and what was the other one that you had done earlier?
Oh, so Chocobo Racing, one of the colors, I forget which one, runs over mountains, and with that you can get to, or maybe you have to have the mountains and seas. Anyway, with one of them prior to gold, you can get to the ancient forest a little earlier, but I think I just did it once I had the gold one. And in there you get a bunch of like pretty useful weapons, armor, equipment, stuff like that. Maybe even some materia. And obviously you can get a bunch of materia through the Chocobo quest. So that's the one I did. I also did the Ultima weapon fight, which is really pretty easy once you've got Knights of the Round, but still pretty epic.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to that. And now I remember the Ancient Forest. It had a very interesting illustrative work. I seem to recall, and is sort of a spherical forest that you have to climb with a green chocobo up, like up on top of like a canyon or something like that. It is spherical-ish, right? Sort of like Epcot Center.
Yeah, from the world map screen, you can always sort of see it up there. You can never reach it. Yeah, but it's much easier to reach after you defeat Ultimate Weapon. It causes this crater to form. So even if you don't have chocobos, you can still get to it after that.
Okay, well, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm hoping that we only missed a couple minutes on the recording, hoping against hope. And I apologize for that, especially because we had such a great conversation this time around. It's funny, I never know whether we're going to be rusty or refreshed after some time, but I'm looking forward this week to really hitting it hard, having Harry Potter with you tomorrow, and then getting another night school up there, maybe another recurrent events. I've got Thursday to work with you this time around, and definitely not making mental slip-ups like I did earlier today, which I apologize about, Wes. But I'm looking forward to putting out some good stuff with you this week. And my God, I can't believe we're almost done with this. We're going to have to turn this into a great book. And determine whether it is itself worthy of the title great. We started doing some work on that today. I hope it's recorded. We did mention that perhaps this game is not epic in scope, but does seem to be epic in the effect it has had on people who are our age when they first played it, like in the way that it imprinted on us, and because of its contemporaneous nature, that people were talking about it and figuring things out about it together, and that is part of the great effect this game has had, and that it also sort of seems to pursue the beautiful and the good in the same way that the epic tradition does, because each Final Fantasy builds on each other and becomes more sophisticated, more involved, although there is some debate about that, in the same way that epics and epic writers try to become more sophisticated and involved and bring the past into the present and shine a new light on things. And I look forward to continuing that conversation with you next time. And potentially even asking to what extent desire to just be in this world is evidence of its epic nature, right? Like, is replayability, like rereadability, a part of the epic scope of something? Because again, when I was reading up on people who wrote about differing character dialogue and what you could get throughout this game if you had certain characters at particular times, one player mentioned having played through this game 20 times. And whether that is a fetish or fetishizing the game, or whether that is actually an endeavor that an epic work makes valuable, and that whether that is time well spent because there is so much in an epic that there's that much information to derive from it, is a question that I would like to try and wrap up in the next few conversations, or at least shoot an arrow at by the end of this, even if we're not quite in a position to make a full-scale commentary on video games as a genre, because of course we still have Chrono Trigger and Xenogears and Zelda. I think Majora's Mask, if not Ocarina of Time, ahead of us, potentially.
There's I think a lot to be said on that question, and I think we may have a conversation lined up with at least one more, maybe two more scholars and students of video game narrative just this coming week. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Me too. It'll be a big week, and I'm feeling good going into it. And looking forward to playing more games with you, Wes.
Thanks.
All right. See ya. Hopefully we got some of this.
Yeah.